Have you ever had one of those days when your patience just runs out? Maybe your grown child says something sharp, or your grandchild refuses to listen for the third time, and suddenly you feel your blood pressure rising, your chest tightening, and that familiar heat rising behind your eyes. You don't want to snap, but it feels like you're right on the edge, and afterward, there's often guilt, maybe even shame, because you didn't want it to go that way. Sound familiar? If you're over 60, you've probably spent a lifetime loving, raising, and sacrificing for your children. You've made meals, paid bills, stayed up late when they were sick, and worried more times than you can count. You love them deeply, but love doesn't mean you don't feel anger. It doesn't mean they don't push your buttons. Sometimes the same buttons they've been pushing since they were 13. Whether you're parenting adult children, helping with grandkids, or simply trying to stay calm during a tense phone call, managing your anger is one of the most powerful things you can do, not just for them, but for your own peace of mind. That's what we're going to talk about today, because anger doesn't have to control you. In fact, learning how to work with it, not against it, can change your relationship with your children and help you feel stronger, clearer, and more in control. Not in a loud, forceful way, but in a calm, centered, deeply grounded way. And that's a power you already have. You just might need a little reminder of how to use it. Let's start by talking about something most people never learn growing up: what anger really is. We often think of anger as something bad, something to avoid, but it's not bad. It's a message. It's your body's way of telling you something's wrong. Anger is a form of energy, part of your brain's natural defense system, what's known as the fight or flight response. And it served our ancestors well when they had to face wild animals or real danger. But when your child rolls their eyes or criticizes your parenting style, your brain can react like you're being attacked by a bear. Your heart pounds, your muscles tense, and you're ready to either argue or walk away. But here's the truth. Your child isn't a threat. Not really. They might frustrate you, disrespect you, or deeply disappoint you, but they're not your enemy. The problem isn't the feeling of anger. The problem is when we react to that feeling without understanding it. That's when we say something we regret. That's when relationships start to crack. And that's why learning to understand anger, not bury it, not suppress it, but understand it, is the first and most important step. So the next time you feel that heat rising, I want you to take a breath and ask yourself, what part of me feels threatened right now? Is this really about my child, or is it about something deeper? That pause, that moment of reflection, can create just enough space for you to respond instead of react. And in that space, you take back your power. Now let's talk about something that might feel a little uncomfortable at first. Taking care of yourself. I know it sounds simple, maybe even selfish, but hear me out. You've spent your whole life putting others first. That's what good parents do, right? But here's what we forget. If you don't take care of yourself, eventually you won't have anything left to give. Think about it like this. When you're on an aeroplane and the flight attendant goes over the safety rules, they always say the same thing. In case of a loss in cabin pressure, put on your own oxygen mask first, before assisting others. Why? Because you can't help anyone else if you're gasping for air. I once spoke with a woman named Linda Carter. She's in her 60s, a retired nurse, and still helping her adult children with grandkids, errands, and everything in between. She came to me absolutely worn out. I asked her to write down everything she was responsible for, everything she managed or helped with during the week. That list stretched across 3 pages, and do you know what wasn't on the list? Herself. Not once. Not a walk. Not a nap. Not even a cup of tea in peace. That moment changed things for her. She realized that she had been treating self-care like it was optional, like it was only okay if everyone else was taken care of first. But that's not how it works. Your emotional health, your rest, your joy, they matter, and they affect how you show up when you're faced with conflict or frustration. The better you care for yourself, the more patience and calm you'll have when the heat rises. And speaking of support, let's not forget something else. You don't have to do this alone. Whether you're married or widowed, whether you have a large family or it's just you and the dog, every parent needs a team. That might be your spouse, a friend, a neighbor, a therapist, or even just someone to call when you're feeling overwhelmed. It might be a caregiver who helps with the grandkids, or even a friendly voice on a YouTube channel like this one. I remember a man named Frank Miller, retired fireman, tough as nails but tender-hearted. He came to one of my workshops after realizing he'd been arguing more with his adult son. The stress was built, but once he started talking, it became clear he was carrying more than he should have been alone. When he started reaching out, talking honestly with his wife, getting support from a counselor, he started to feel like himself again. He wasn't bottling things up anymore. He started to approach conversations with his son, not from a place of defensiveness, but from strength. And that made all the difference. You see, parenting at any age isn't about having all the answers. It's about growing along with your children, even as they grow up. It's about having the humility to ask for help and the courage to care for yourself. And if there's one more thing that can help you manage your anger almost immediately, it's this: adjusting your expectation. Now this one can be tricky, especially if you're a person who values order, respect, or tradition. Maybe you expect your grown daughter to call every week. Maybe you expect your teenage grandson to show gratitude when you help him with something. And when those expectations aren't met, the frustration creeps in. But here's the secret: most anger starts with a gap between what we expect and what actually happens. The wider that gap, the stronger the reaction. But if you can adjust your expectations just a little, if you can remind yourself that people are imperfect, that your child may not always act how you wish, but they're still learning, you'll create more room for peace. Try this for a day. Whenever your child or grandchild does something that rubs you the wrong way, pause and say to yourself, this is exactly what I should expect from someone in their stage of life. Not in a sarcastic way, but in a loving, accepting way. They're learning, you're learning, and when you expect imperfection, you won't be as disappointed when it shows up. And that mindset opens the door for something even more powerful. When you start from a place of acceptance, you begin to create emotional space, not just for your child, but for yourself. And in that space, you're not reacting on impulse, you're choosing how you want to show up. That's when the real shift happens. Let me share something simple but powerful. Your beliefs shape your emotions. Think about that. If you believe something is going wrong, your body follows with stress, tension, frustration. But if you shift that belief just a little, you start to feel different, even in the same situation. One of the most helpful things you can do when your child isn't meeting your expectations is to try on a new belief. You don't have to commit to it forever, just try it on, like you would a jacket. Maybe the old belief sounds like this: they shouldn't act that way, or this isn't how I raised them. That belief naturally creates frustration, even resentment. But what if you tried something soft, something like they're doing the best they can with what they know right now, or even, maybe this is exactly how things are meant to be for now. Now I know that might sound a little too calm, especially if your adult son just said something rude or your granddaughter rolled her eyes at you again. But beliefs are like lenses. When you change the lens, the whole picture changes. And this new belief, this gentler lens, doesn't mean you agree with bad behavior. It means you're choosing peace over control, understanding over blame. And that leads me to something that can be so healing: learning to enjoy your children again. I know that might feel a little strange to hear, especially if things have been tense lately. But let me tell you something I've learned after decades of listening to parents from all walks of life. Enjoying your child is a choice. It's not always easy, especially when they're going through hard phases or making decisions that break your heart. But it's still a choice. I once gave a challenge to Frank Miller, the retired fireman I mentioned earlier. He was feeling disconnected from his teenage son and said he barely enjoyed being around him anymore. I looked him in the eye and said, "What if I told you there's a $1,000 reward for spending 3 days simply enjoying your son?" He laughed at first, but then he paused. "Well," he said, "I guess I'd have to change how I think about him." Bingo. Because it's not just about the child's behavior, it's about your mindset. If you look for what frustrates you, you'll find it. But if you go into each day looking for something to enjoy, something simple like a shared laugh, a quirky habit, even just the way they say a certain word, you'll find that too. And the more you look for it, the easier it becomes. I want you to think back to the early years, when your child was still learning how to walk or talk. Every step, every sound was a miracle. You smiled through the mess. You laughed at the nonsense. You gave grace for the spills and tantrums. You didn't expect them to be perfect. You expected them to grow. And they still are. Even if they're 25 or 45 or 60, they're still figuring it out. And you can still choose to find moments of joy in the journey. But sometimes to really feel that joy, we have to clear out the emotional clutter. And one of the best ways to do that is to stay positive. Not in a fake, forced kind of way. I'm not talking about plastering on a smile and pretending everything's fine. I'm talking about genuine gratitude, that quiet shift where you pause for a moment and say, "What's good here? What can I be thankful for right now?" Maybe your daughter doesn't visit as often as you'd like, but she still calls. Maybe your grandson talks back sometime, but he still asks for your advice when he's really in trouble. Maybe your family is a little messy, but they're your mess, and there's beauty in that. Gratitude isn't about ignoring the hard parts. It's about seeing the whole picture. It softens your perspective, calms your nerves, and reminds you what really matters. And from that place of gratitude, you can start to make intentional upgrades, not to control anyone else, but to show up as the kind of parent, grandparent, or family member you want to be. One of the most profound shifts I've seen in older parents and grandparents is when they stop trying to fix everything and start focusing on how they want to feel: calm, loving, steady. It's not about the outcome, it's about your presence. And if you ever feel like that presence doesn't matter, let me remind you of something. It matters more than you think. When you stay calm, your child feels it. When you soften your words, they listen more closely. When you offer love instead of judgment, even the hardest hearts begin to open. Not overnight, not always in the way you expect, but your energy sets the tone. You may not have control over your child's choices, but you have total control over how you respond to those choices. That's where your power lies. And the older you get, the more powerful that response becomes. Not because you're louder, but because your love has deep roots. So let's take a breath together right now, just for a moment. Inhale slowly and exhale. You've made it this far. You've already done so much, and there's still time, so much time to repair, reconnect, and renew. Every conversation, every smile, every thoughtful pause can be a step toward healing, not just for your child, but for you. And now that we're feeling a bit more grounded, I want to talk about something that brings it all together. It's not complicated, but it's powerful, and it starts with remembering who your children truly are. That might sound obvious, but it's easy to forget when emotions run high. They're not just your kids, they're human beings with their own thoughts, struggles, memories, and wounds. They aren't just reflections of you or results of your parenting. They are their own stories, unfolding every day. Sometimes when we feel anger toward our kids, especially as we get older, it's not really about them. It's about the grief of watching them make mistakes, the disappointment when they don't turn out exactly as we'd hoped, the helplessness when we want to protect them, but can't. Those emotions are deep, and they're honest, but they aren't meant to live inside us like storm clouds. They're meant to move through us and pass. The more we remember our kids are people, not possessions, not projects to fix, the more compassion we find. I think of parenting as a sacred stewardship. For a little while, these souls were entrusted to our care, and then, as all things must, they begin to grow away from us. That's part of the design. Our job isn't to hold on tightly, it's to let go wisely. And that's why, as strange as it sounds, part of being a good parent means working yourself out of the job. I know that's not always easy. Maybe your adult daughter is still calling you for help every week. Maybe your son rarely calls at all. Either way, your job isn't to control how close or how distant they are. Your job is to keep loving them, no matter what. And even if that right there, those 5 words, might be the most important part of this entire conversation. Love them, no matter what. Even if they don't say thank you, even if they disagree with your beliefs, even if they've made mistakes you can hardly bear to think about. You can love without agreeing, you can love without condoning, and when you do, something powerful happens, not just in them, but in you. You stop measuring your worth by their behavior, you stop keeping score, and you start showing up with more freedom, more lightness, more peace. That doesn't mean you don't set boundaries, it just means those boundaries come from wisdom, not resentment. There's a kind of quiet strength in that kind of love, the kind that says, I may not like what you're doing right now, but I will never stop loving you. That's the kind of love that heals family. That's the kind of love that never goes out of style, no matter how old your kids get, or how modern the world becomes. And finally, the most powerful step of all, remembering who you are. That might sound simple, but in the daily stresses of life, it's something we often forget. You are not just a parent, you are not just someone who makes meals, solves problems, or gives advice. You are a whole person. You've lived through seasons of joy, loss, love, and learning. And through it all, you've carried wisdom that can't be bought in books or earned in school. Sometimes we lose sight of ourselves when we're constantly thinking about others, our kids, our spouse, our family. But when you forget who you are, it becomes harder to respond with grace, with patience, with love. That's why it matters. You are someone who chose to keep showing up even when it was hard. You are someone who's still growing, still learning, still trying to love better. You are someone who can change the energy in a room just by staying calm when everyone else is losing their cool. That's not weakness, that's real strength, that's legacy, that's leadership. So I want to speak to the part of you that might be tired, that might be hurting, that might wonder if any of this makes a difference. It does. Every time you choose peace over anger, patience over punishment, understanding over judgment, you are making a difference. You are rewriting the story, not just for your family, but for yourself. You deserve peace. You deserve respect. And you deserve to feel proud of how far you've come. Parenting doesn't end when your child turns 18, or 30, or even 50, it just evolves. And the truth is, the older you get, the more powerful your presence becomes. Not because of what you say, but because of how you say it, because of who you are when you say it. So today I hope you'll give yourself the same grace you're trying to give your children. I hope you'll take a walk, take a breath, or take a moment to laugh at something small. I hope you'll reconnect with the joy of being their parent, even when it's hard, even when it's messy, even when it's far from perfect. And if this video has spoken to you even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What has helped you stay calm in tense moments? What part of today's message resonated most with you? Drop a comment below. I read every one, and your story might help someone else who's walking the same road. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more encouragement, tools, and support as you navigate the beautiful, challenging, ever-changing journey of parenting after 60. You've got more strength than you know, more wisdom than you realize, and more love to give than ever before. Here's to staying calm, staying connected, and living your best life at any age. Take good care, and I'll see you in the next video.